Esther 6 to Job 4. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your love. Thank you for another morning, another breath. Thank you for your word. Thank you for what your word does in my body, in my spirit, in my mind, in my life, in our life. And thank you for how you have patience, how you forgive us, how you love us. Thank you for so many things, for the shower that I got to have, the bed I got to sleep on, the food I get to eat. I mean, the abundance is real, and I just am grateful. I'm so very grateful because I've been without these things, and I know that wow, that you provide and that you want good things for us. And I thank you for wanting those good things for us. And I thank you for your fatherly corrections. And I just pray that we can be the salt and the light in the world that you've called us to be, that you will help us, and that in moments where we are not, that we can just overcome those and just draw closer and closer to you each moment of each day. And thank you for the body of Christ, the body that keeps me motivated and that we encourage one another. And I just thank you for allowing there to be a place where I could share with you. And that is my daughter's alarm. So I thank you for this day. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. That night, the king had trouble sleeping, so he ordered an attendant to bring the historical records of his kingdom so they could be read to him. In those records, he discovered an account of how Mordecai had exposed the plot of Bigthan and Tresh, two of the eunuchs who guarded the door to the king's private quarters. They had plotted to assassinate the king. What reward or recognition did we ever give Mordecai for this? The king asked. His attendants replied, "Nothing has been done." "Who is that in the outer court?" the king inquired. Now, as it happened, Haman had just arrived in the outer court of the palace to ask the king to hang Mordecai from the gallows he had prepared. So the attendant replied to the king, "Haman is out there. Bring him in," the king ordered. So Haman came in, and the king said, "What should I do to honor a man who truly pleases me?" Haman thought to himself, "Whom would the king wish to honor more than me?" So he replied, "If the king wishes to honor someone, he should bring out one of the king's own royal robes, as well as the king's own horse with a royal emblem on its head. Instruct one of the king's most noble princes to dress the man in the king's robe and to lead him through the city square on the king's own horse. Have the prince shout as they go, 'This is what happens to those the king wishes to honor.'" "Excellent," the king said to Haman. "Hurry and get the robe and my horse, and do just as you have said for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate of the palace. Do not fail to carry out everything you have suggested." So Haman took the robe and put it on Mordecai, placed him on the king's own horse, and led him through the city square shouting, "This is what happens to those the king wishes to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the palace gate, but Haman hurried home, dejected and completely humiliated. When Haman told his wife, Varesh, and all his friends what had happened, they said, "Since Mordecai, this man who has humiliated you, is a Jew, you will never succeed in your plans against him. It will be fatal to continue to oppose him." While they were still talking, the king's eunuch arrived to take Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine that day, the king again asked her, "Tell me what you want, Queen Esther. What is your request? I will give it to you even if it is half the kingdom." And so Queen Esther replied, "If your majesty is pleased with me and wants to grant my request, my petition is that my life and the lives of my people will be spared, for my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had only been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would have been a matter too trivial to warrant disturbing the king." "Who would do such a thing?" King Xerxes demanded. "Who would dare touch you?" Esther replied, "This wicked Haman is our enemy." Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen. Then the king jumped to his feet in a rage and went out into the palace garden. But Haman stayed behind to plead for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that he was doomed. In despair, he fell on the couch where Queen Esther was reclining. Just as the king returned from the palace garden, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" the king roared. And as soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. Then Harbona, one of the king's eunuchs, said, "Haman has set up a gallows that stands 75 feet tall in his own courtyard. He intended to use it to hang Mordecai, the man who saved the king from assassination." "Then hang Haman on it," the king ordered. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had set up for Mordecai, and the king's anger was pacified. On that same day, King Xerxes gave the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Now once more Esther came before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop Haman's evil plot against the Jews. Again the king held out the gold scepter to Esther. So she rose and stood before him and said, "If your majesty is pleased with me, and if he thinks it is right, send out a decree reversing Haman's order to destroy the Jews throughout all the provinces of the king. For how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed?" Then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "I have given Esther the estate of Haman, and he has been hanged on the gallows because he tried to destroy the Jews. Now go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want, and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can never be revoked." So on June 25th, the king's secretaries were summoned. As Mordecai dictated, they wrote a decree to the Jews and to the princes, governors, and local officials of all the 127 provinces stretching from India to Ethiopia. The decree was written in the scripts and languages of all the people of the empire, including the Jews. Mordecai wrote, "In the name of King Xerxes," and sealed the message with the king's signet ring. He sent the letters by swift messengers who rode horses especially bred for the king's service. The king's decree gave the Jews in every city authority to unite to defend their lives. They were allowed to kill, slaughter, and annihilate anyone of any nationality or province who might attack them or their children and wives, and to take the property of their enemies. The day chosen for this event throughout all the provinces of King Xerxes was March 7 on the next year. A copy of this decree was to be recognized as law in every province and proclaimed to all the people. That way the Jews would be ready on that day to take revenge on their enemies. So, urged on by the king's command, the messengers rode out swiftly on horses bred for the king's service. The same decree was also issued at the fortress of Susa. Then Mordecai put on the royal robe of blue and white and the great crown of gold, and he wore an outer coat of fine linen and purple. And the people of Susa celebrated the new decree. The Jews were filled with joy and gladness, and were honored everywhere, in every city and province. Wherever the king's decree arrived, the Jews rejoiced and had a great celebration and declared a public festival and holiday. And many of the people of the land became Jews themselves, for they feared what the Jews might do to them. So on March 7, the 2 decrees of the king were put into effect. On that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to destroy them, but quite the opposite happened. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the king's province to defend themselves against anyone who might try to harm them. But no one could make a stand against them, for everyone was afraid of them. And all the commanders of the province, the princes, the governors, and the royal officials helped the Jews for fear of Mordecai. For Mordecai had been promoted in the king's palace, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces as he became more and more powerful. But the Jews went ahead on the appointed day and struck down their enemies with the sword. They killed and annihilated their enemy and did as they pleased with those who hated them. They killed 500 people in the fortress of Susa. They also killed Parsendatha, Dalphon, Ashphatha, Poratha, Adalia, Ardath, Parmashta, Arisia, Ardai, and Vavatha. The 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not take any plunder. That evening, when the king was informed of the number of people killed in the fortress of Susa, he called for Queen Esther and said, "The Jews have killed 500 people in the fortress of Susa alone, and also Haman's 10 sons. If they have done that here, what has happened in the rest of the provinces? But now, what more do you want? It will be granted to you. Tell me, and I will do it." And Esther said, "If it pleases your majesty, give the Jews in Susa permission to do again tomorrow as they have done today, and have the bodies of Haman's 10 sons hung from the gallows." So the king agreed, and the decree was announced in Susa. They also hung the bodies of Haman's 10 sons from the gallows. Then the Jews at Susa gathered together on March 8th and killed 300 more people, though again they took no plunder. Meanwhile, the other Jews throughout the king's province had gathered together to defend their lives. They gained relief from all their enemies, killing 75,000 of those who hated them, but they did not take any plunder. Throughout the provinces, this was done on March 7th. Then on the following day, they rested, celebrating their victory with a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews at Susa continued killing their enemies on the 2nd day also, and then rested on the 3rd day, making that their day of feasting and gladness. So to this day, rural Jews living in unwalled villages celebrate an annual festival and holiday in late winter, when they rejoice and send gifts to each other. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to the Jews near and far throughout all the king's provinces, encouraging them to celebrate an annual festival on those 2 days. He told them to celebrate these days with feasting and gladness, and by giving gifts to each other and to the poor. This would commemorate a time when the Jews gained relief from their enemies, when their sorrow was turned into gladness and their mourning into joy. So the Jews adopted Mordecai's suggestion and began this annual custom. Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews, had plotted to crush and destroy them on the day and month determined by casting lots. The lots were called Purim. But when Esther came before the king, he issued a decree causing Haman's evil plot to backfire, and Haman and his sons were hanged on the gallows. That is why this celebration is called Purim, because it is the ancient word for casting lots. So because of Mordecai's letter and because of what they had experienced, the Jews throughout the realm agreed to inaugurate this tradition and to pass it on to their descendants and to all who became Jews. They declared they would never fail to celebrate these 2 prescribed days at the appointed time each year. These days would be remembered and kept from generation to generation and celebrated by every family throughout the province and cities of the empire. These days would never cease to be celebrated among the Jews, nor would the memory of what happened ever die out among their descendants. The queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote another letter putting the queen's full authority behind Mordecai's letter to establish the festival of Purim. In addition, letters wishing peace and security were sent to the Jews throughout the 127 provinces of the empire of Xerxes. These letters established the festival of Purim, an annual celebration of these days at the appointed time, decreed by both Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther. The people decided to observe this festival, just as they had decided for themselves and their descendants to establish the times of fasting and mourning. So the command of Esther confirmed the practices of Purim, and it was all written down in the records.
It was written. He said, scatter the seed. He told us walk by faith and we won't lack a thing. Pray without ceasing.